one of the interesting challenges that are kind of unique to Bitcoin is that consumers don't necessarily see a lot of the pain points, right? That's hidden away or it's experienced by the merchants. So PubKey were a participant in the report. And they talk about chargebacks and the cost of payments, and every time someone buys a pint here with a credit card, they're paying 25 cents or more. That's just gone to paying to receive payments. Whereas with Bitcoin, that's completely free, right? And if you add that up, or almost free, if you add that up for the number of pints that someone of the scale of PubKey sells, it's a meaningful amount for their business, let alone with the chargebacks as well. And what consumers don't really see as well is that when you're using a credit card, it feels instant because the payment is different from a settlement, and it feels free because everything's already 3.5% more expensive than it otherwise would have been to cover all the issuing bank and payment processing and credit card issuers that are involved in that chain. But all the prices are artificially inflated by the cost of actually conducting those payments. And from the merchant's point of view, for the instant settlement piece, the authorization of the payment is different from the actual settlement, the actual receiving of the funds, which can take 90 to 100 days later. So while you may be taking money at the bar, the consumer can walk away, that's great. You can't use those funds for a month or 3 months later. That creates a significant drag on the velocity of payments and the ability for businesses to actually manage their cash flow and use those funds for other things. So that instant payment piece of, again, Bitcoin being an internet native bearer instrument, that the payment essentially is the settlement, means that those funds can flow at a much more rapid pace and be used a lot more frequently, and there aren't chargebacks, so once you receive those monies, you know that they're actually there to use. I don't know if this was going to be in a later point, but there was an example of a charity that they would receive donations from credit cards, $5. And then someone would charge it back, and they would end up having to pay a $15 fee. So the charity's losing, $20 of opportunity cost for nothing. Whereas with Bitcoin, when they receive those funds, not only are they instantly accessible, not only are they not having to pay, lose a bit of the markup for the credit card processing, but they're also irreversible, and they don't have to worry about, if that's going to be charged back. And that's a meaningful, at scale, huge problem and expense and administrative burden. We talk about, was it Water Trust, who have to face this issue every day, PubKey themselves, who are having to pay for this. So numerous different examples of how actual live, real-time, free, instant settlement can actually materially change the operations of a business, of a nonprofit, of a merchant. And ultimately, that feeds back to consumers in the form of lower prices over time.
And one of the examples, so sorry to put her on the spot, but Umi has an example of what sometimes these problems can feel kind of unattached to us, right? So when we talk about chargebacks, you're kind of, okay, that person's dealing with it. But actually, when they decide to pass that cost on to you, that has a repercussion. And you had an experience at your PTA recently, right? So any parents might relate to this one.
So the use case of where I feel right now in my everyday life, and I'd love to hear examples from everybody as well later, where I think where Bitcoin could solve the friction point, I feel, as a means of medium of exchange or payment. Because usually in my everyday life, I can Venmo people. We're privileged. We're in the U.S., so why Bitcoin kind of comes up. But so I have 2 young kids. They're in a New York City public school, and I pay for their extended daycare that's run by the school. And the school, they recently added a new bill to the invoice of $9, and it's usually a $300 payment. So I asked them, what's this $9? And they're like, oh, actually last year, the platform we use, we had to pay $45,000 in credit card processing fees to them, and we can't afford that, so we're passing it on to you, the parents. So there, I actually emailed them and said, do you accept Bitcoin? And she said, hold on, I'll check and get back to you. But it was interesting, the fact that the admin didn't immediately dismiss me. They actually took it back to consider, because it is a friction point. They're trying to solve it. And she said, we understand the pain. We don't want to have you take on those costs, but we don't know what to do. Everybody wants to pay online. We're digitally connected. We do everything on the internet now. But the only way to avoid the fee is if you write a check and bring it to the school every month. No one's going to do that right now in this day and age, right? We want to do everything online, but the only alternative is, and we've kind of normalized this, paying the 3%. You might see it on your local bodega, minimum charge. If it's $10, under $10, 5%, or even if it's just, if you're going to use a credit card at the bodega, we're going to charge you 5%. And that's normalized, and you kind of think, well, I get the 2%, 3% back in credits or miles, or, you try to normalize it, but it's actually not normal. We live in a day and age where we can buy things online, exchange information online, connect online, but we can't transfer value online until now with Bitcoin. The tools are there, it just needs to be implemented. And we need to get builders, people implementing Bitcoin in their apps and solution. That's kind of not why used for everyday users like you and me, but for the apps and platforms that we engage with on a daily basis, why for them to use Bitcoin in their solutions for us to be able to access. But that was kind of my gripe of not wanting to pay the $9 every month.
But if you kind of think about that, right, it's a niche example, but it's an example that affects day-to-day life, and there's a solution at play that can fix it. And then if you start thinking about more, Umi kind of mentioned there about this is the first time we're able to do this, not using an intermediary to make a transaction or a third party in itself is a revolutionary idea. The idea that I don't have to rely on another party, that I can't, don't have to go, can I get your permission to do this, is why this is such a radical change. And you're right.
This is the question that is confusing me, and I'll admit I'm completely new to this, right? We can attest to that. But I get screwed all the time on my credit card charges because we live in this digital age and money moves fast like that, right? So I eat the credit card costs because I bitch and Amex all the time to give me my money back. I get your point about this is moving without the intermediary. What happens if I get screwed? Is there, what's the resolution for that?
This is a great critique, and I don't think I'm going to have the perfect answers here either. This is why I definitely say that we're at the start of this, but I think there are checks and balances that you can use, right? So there are custodial players, there are custodial options that maybe give you those securities, and maybe in the future there are business models around that. That could be a solution. I think one of the things, that recourse of protecting the consumer, there are benefits. I wouldn't lie, that's maybe a cost of doing a payment. But in some cases, you don't want to do that. So I guess, to answer your question, I think the market would dictate that, which is a terrible answer. But...
Yeah, I get that you're trying to answer, but if you end up with business models to protect the consumer in that, aren't they just going to charge me something like
but it's opt-in rather than compulsory.
Yeah, I
right?
think that's
the
a key point, right? There's optionality. Right now, everyone pays 3.5% extra. I'm actually pretty weird. I don't have a credit card. I just pay for debit cards. So I'm subsidizing your insurance, basically, right, by accident, by virtue of not benefiting from the chargebacks or the points or the miles. Right, so if you want to pay 3% extra and have those protections through a central intermediary, you're still free to do that. But now other people have the option to pay less if they don't want to have that as well.